Are there any events from your childhood that you would say shaped who you are today?
When I was a kid, my parents got divorced when I was like 4. And aside from all the obvious stuff, one of the major things that was a result of that was that my mom lived in New York and my dad lived in Florida. And so every summer, I would go to Florida for the summer to see my dad because it was so far, I couldn't really travel back and forth. And so when I was staying with my dad, I was usually staying with my grandparents. And so I spent a lot of time with my grandparents and a lot of time, in effect, being raised by my grandparents and hearing their stories and following their rules. And I think that that, to some extent, affected how, how things were for me growing up, because there was like a whole other generation there being, kind of.
That widened your perspective.
Well, and in sometimes when I feel like, in some ways I think it made me take on some values and habits and whatnot that are a little older than I am, because I learned these values and habits from them. They were very much affected by the Depression. They, like trouble having enough to eat during the Depression. So the entire idea of putting more food on your plate than you can eat and then leaving the rest of it there still bothers me. And it's not about how much you're eating, it's how much you're wasting. Waste makes me crazy. And I'm pretty sure that that kind of goes back to, being raised so intimately by people who were so adverse to waste themselves that, I still see that in myself, and I'm pretty sure that it goes back to that. So, here's this thing, and I'm obviously nowhere near the generation to have gone through the Depression, and yet here's the Depression still affecting me 60 years after, 70 years after it happened, because I spent so much time as a kid with people who were so greatly affected by it. So.
What were your mom and dad like?
My mom was busy. She was doing the single parent thing 9 months of the year, and not just a single parent with a break every other weekend. Like 9 months of the year, I was with her every single day. And there was, she was a single parent. My dad had the luxury that I was only ever with him in the summer. He never had to do the whole homework and grades and school projects and bedtimes. I mean, even bedtimes weren't that big a deal because it was summertime, So I don't know that I had the most accurate picture of my dad, because I was never around him having that, it's like I was always around my dad in a vacation setting, so that it's hard to, in some ways I don't know if I might have had a different opinion of my dad if he and my mom had lived closer together and I had seen him more and interacted with him more in a wide range of different types of circumstances. My mom, she was a single parent. When I was in elementary school, she went to night school and eventually graduated when I was in, I think, the 5th grade. First one in her family to get a college degree, and she did it in night school as a single parent with a kid. She worked really hard, um, made a lot of sacrifices, and so she was busy and she was hardworking, but I can definitely, I have all kinds of memories of going into the city and going to Chinatown and having lunch on Sundays and we did stuff, we had fun, but things were also could be pretty busy too. So, but it was a different relationship because it was just the two of us. I didn't have any brothers or sisters with my mom, so I don't know if that was the most realistic relationship, but it's made us very close as adults too.
What are some important characteristics that you like to see in people, or even yourself?
Honesty's a big thing. It's kind of a cornerstone to a lot. Acceptance, accepting other people, even if they don't agree with you, if they aren't exactly like you. The willingness to allow people to be themselves and to not fit into a certain little mold of what you expect from them. I look for that in the people that I surround myself with, and I guess that's.
What did you like about going to school?
Like when I was a kid?
When you were a kid, when you were a teenager, when you were in college, whatever you want to talk about.
I was pretty social when I was a kid, so my biggest thing was I liked that I got to see my friends. Where I lived, I didn't go to the school that was closest to where I lived, because I was in a different program. So the kids that I knew at school, we didn't live in the same neighborhood with each other. So unless we were at school, we didn't really get to see each other.
Why were you in a different program?
When I was a kid, there was it was set up a little differently. And so all of the kids that were in my class had been identified for a gifted program. And our entire curriculum was gifted all the time, not just one day a week where we went, to another school for a program. It was all the time, all day, the entire class full of gifted kids. So we lived all over Staten Island, and we converged on one school that was kind of centrally located. But that's why the kids in my class weren't really, they weren't necessarily my next door neighbors. There were other kids in my neighborhood that I knew, but I didn't go to school with them. And we were this one class that moved through elementary school without, the only time there were changes is if somebody moved or something. It wasn't, like here where they rearrange the classes every year when they distribute, however many teachers there's going to be. So at that time, one of my favorite things about going to school was getting to see my friends that I didn't get to see on nights and weekends.
What did you like about college?
Oh, I loved getting out of the house and being on my own and having my own freedom. I loved not sitting in school for 8 hours a day. I liked the flexible schedule where you could set up your own schedule if you weren't, you could try to avoid 8 a.m. classes. You could, but the biggest thing was I liked being on my own and not nearly as much being told what to do and how to do it. You know, I preferred finding my own way on how to do things, and I guess that's like every teenager though.
What are some of your favorite genres of books, or even some individual books that you really enjoy?
I usually read fantasy and science fiction stuff. Although honestly, I will read anything if it's in front of me and I have nothing else to read. When I was a kid, in the summer times, I would easily read at least a novel a day all summer long. I've always liked to read. And so eventually, especially with my grandparents, I would run out of stuff to read. And so then I would start reading books that they had, and just for the sake of having something in my hand to read. Can't think of what I would say is like my absolute favorite book. Because most of the time I don't reread stuff. There's too much other stuff to go read that I've never read before. So I don't reread stuff. And it's not that I didn't like it, it's just that I want to go see what else there is to read.
Okay, I can understand that.
Wow.
Are there any TV shows that you really like?
Well, that falls. I mean, that's like reading. Why keep watching the same thing? You can go watch something else. I like mystery shows. I like even like crime shows. I like, there's been a handful of fantasy shows that I've really liked. But like I said, I mean, I'm mostly just still going on and reading and watching, and the next thing that, what else is there? More. I don't know.
What is your favorite holiday tradition?
Oh, well. I mean, my favorite holiday is Christmas. And I love when we all get together, and I like shopping for stuff for people and things that I think they'll like, and I get all excited about, But I always liked, I don't think we do it as much now, but something that my mom and I did when I was a kid was that we would always open one small thing on Christmas Eve. And the person giving got to pick it. But it couldn't be like your big main present or whatever. It had to be some smaller thing. But so that was always because that was sort of a one special particular thing that and most Christmas Eves were just the two of us, where on Christmas Day we were likely to be with my cousins or something like that. So, but we don't really get to, I guess now we go to church on Christmas Eve, and then we go have supper out, and then when we get back, especially the littler kids in the house get sent off to bed so that I can get things wrapped. But I like, when we go to Christmas Eve Mass and then go to dinner. Yeah, Chinese buffet or wherever. Very often Chinese buffet. Kind of reminds me of in the Christmas Story when the dogs eat the turkey, so they end up going out for Chinese, and the mother's all freaked out about the duck. Anyway, kind of reminds me of that, which is like my favorite Christmas movie. So
you do have a favorite?
I have a favorite Christmas movie with the leg lamp and the Red Ryder BB gun. But yeah.
How did you meet your husband?
I met Mark at work. At the time, we were both archaeologists, and at the time anyway, the way things worked is a company would have a job that they were going to do, and they would hire some archaeologists for the extent of the job, and so it was you were kind of contracted to do each individual job, and we had both, without knowing each other or anything, had gotten hired by a company to do a big survey project in the middle of nowhere in Indiana. And we were living on the military base and living in the barracks. And so when we actually first met each other was just at work. We were working on the same project. And we were so far out in the middle of nowhere that there wasn't really anywhere to go to do stuff, go out to eat or, go to movies or whatever. We mostly just sat around watching the 3 channels that were on the TV in the barracks. And so at the time, I traveled with a Scrabble board, and I started asking around on the crew for someone who would play Scrabble with me. And Mark was the only one who would play Scrabble with me, and he'd never really played before, but he was, he was game. And so he would come over because the boys were in the men's barracks, the girls were in the officers' barracks because there was only 2 of us, but he would come over to the officers' barracks and we would play Scrabble and eat our dinner and stuff like that. And it wasn't until much later that we realized that the entire crew thought that we were dating and that there was this whole big, drama going on, and really we were just sitting around playing Scrabble and eating our dinner. But that was how we met and how we got to know each other and how we got closer, was playing Scrabble. So it's kind of still a thing. Every so often we pull out the Scrabble board.
Where around the world have you traveled?
Well, Mark and I had been together then for about, that we knew of, we'd been together for 8 months. Apparently we'd been together a little longer than that. But Mark decided to surprise me, and he bought tickets to go to Italy because we had once been in the car, and he had asked me, if you could go anywhere in the world, where would you go? And I said Italy because it had all kinds of archaeology, it had all kinds of art, it had all kinds of architecture. And, I had said Italy. Didn't think anything was ever going to come of it. And the next thing I know, he's bought airline tickets for a month to stay in Italy. And so off we went. And we went to Rome and Naples and Florence and Venice and Pompeii, of course. And, but at the end of the month when we were in Venice, that was when he asked me to marry him. And I said yes, and so that was pretty exciting. And so then about a year later, we got married up at Serpent Mound, and we went on our honeymoon, and we went for a week to Paris. And so, but in the process of getting to Italy, we had this 12-hour layover in London, and oddly enough, and weird coincidences, we were traveling 2 days after Princess Diana was killed. And so we went into London, and we were there at Buckingham Palace where everybody was bringing flowers, and there was all this media, and so we only had the 1 day in London, and we couldn't do a lot because so much was closed. But we did see, I guess, one kind of once in a, one of a kind kind of thing.
What's one of your favorite spots in Europe to visit after you were there?
I really liked our time in Florence, but I think some of that was because I really liked where we were staying. It was a hotel that was kind of run by a family, and so it was they lived there too, and it was just one floor of this building. It wasn't a whole big commercial establishment. It was a lot smaller, and the center part of Florence is closed to vehicles, so it's all walking, and it's a lot quieter, and I really enjoyed our time there. But anyway.
What is something you would like to do in the future?
Oh, I'd like to travel again.
Where would you go?
Oh, there's more of Europe to be seen. There's a lot more of Europe. Mark and I have talked about the whole England, Scotland, Ireland thing, kind of all together.
Iceland.
Yeah, but Iceland's like, that's a whole other trip, you know. We've talked about Germany, kind of the same way we did Italy, where, you know, you go from town to town in Germany and see the different areas and whatnot. There's places in the Middle East I'd love to go, but I won't go until it's more politically settled. No death wishes here.
What are some of those places?
Oh, I mean, I'd love to go to Egypt. I'd love to see Cairo. I mean, you know, but the Middle East is kind of a scary place still. I'm not ready to.
I've always thought I'd go to Brazil.
I know. Somehow South America. I mean, I've been to Mexico and I've been around in the Bahamas and stuff. I'm more of an art and architecture person, and when I start thinking about South America, although South America's got all that Inca stuff, so I don't know.
Ancient civilization.
Again, and Mark always said to me, well, wouldn't you like to go back to Italy? And it's like, yeah, I'd like to go back to Italy, but there's all these other places.
You're always about no.
Like, to see as much as possible, to read as much, watch as much, visit as much, you know. So it's, you know, that's a tough one, but.
What do you find interesting about yourself?
How it is that I grew up in New York and I ended up in rural Ohio. You know, I guess the fact that my family moved around quite a bit and that kind of shaped a lot, but I still can't. Just seems like a really weird progression to have grown up in New York and gone to high school in Tennessee, but in a big, like 50,000 people city in Tennessee, and to then now end up, you know, in really rural Ohio. I've kind of lived in quite the variety of places.
You went from living everywhere to becoming an archaeologist and moving everywhere.
Yeah, and I've actually at this point lived in southern Ohio longer than I've ever lived anywhere else in my life.
That's weird.
Like, I've been here for 12 years, and that's the longest I've ever been in one place. And it's southern Ohio, which is actually funny because my dad was from northern Ohio, so full circle kind of thing.
What is your favorite food?
Oh, that's pizza and ice cream, but mostly pizza. Because you can, like, there's not just one pizza. There's all the pizzas and all the different types of pizzas and kinds of pizzas and the crusts and the sauce and the different toppings you can have. And it's all good unless it's a Totino's pizza. That's just revolting. But
where do you like to go get pizza? Like your favorite place to eat?
I don't know, man. It's all good. I mean, I tend to, if I could, money were no object, I like New York style pizza. That's, you know, what I ate as a kid. That's sort of, you know, but it doesn't mean I don't like, you know, others from around. The pizza in Italy was pretty good, but it was, you know, like fired in a brick oven kind of pizza. So that was, you know, yet a different thing entirely.
What is your favorite artist?
I've always liked Van Gogh. I like the swirly, dreamy quality of his paintings. I mean, Starry Night's one of the, you know, most well-known pieces, and yet it's, you know, I don't have any, like, fancy, obscure favorite. It's, you know, still something that's so immensely well-known and popular with a lot of people.
Do you have any regrets in life so far?
I wish I'd kept up with going to school more. I wish I had gone to graduate school, but I got distracted. I got burnt out on school for a while, and then I just got sidelined, and I didn't really know what to do, what I would go back to school for. But I kind of wish I had. I wish I had.
Why'd you get burned out?
Because I was a very intense student. You know, I very focused and very driven and very hardworking student, and it just kind of I got tired. I got just worn out on it. And then I got distracted and switched over to archaeology. And I liked working in the field. I mean, it was like so completely different from what I'd been doing at school. But then at a certain point, I realized that there wasn't a lot of upward mobility, and I couldn't justify the cost of going to school because it wasn't going to do me much in that field. And I didn't think at the time that I could like switch to a whole new field. Somehow that had not occurred to me. And so I just never went back to school, but I wish I had.
What is something you really enjoy doing each week?
Does sleeping count?
I guess.
No, I don't know. I don't know what exactly the questions.
Something in your routine that you like.
No, I like going out to lunch with my friend Carla every week. That's always kind of nice. It's just the two of us, and it's not, there's no kids, there's no husbands, there's no, and it's just the two of us. And so I like that a lot.
What is your favorite Disney movie, and why is it your favorite Disney movie?
I think my favorite Disney movie might be The Jungle Book, but I think a lot of that's because of the music. The music is just crazy good, and there's some really, like, the buzzards are so funny, and the music is good, and
Aren't the buzzards modeled after the Beatles?
Yeah, a bit. Yeah. They were kind of, yeah. But that was a lot, that's a lot of it for me, is the music in The Jungle Book is just incredible.
What is the first thing that you would do to improve your house?
I'm not doing anything to improve my house until the kids move out, because everything I do ends up getting, it needs to be painted inside. It needs, that's the big thing, it needs to be painted. It's probably going to need new carpet soon. It needs to get the kids out of it and all their stuff. Kids have a lot of stuff.
Do you have any collections?
Not really anymore. I have a bit of an elephant collection, but I don't really add to that anymore. But there's too much stuff at our house.
What are some collections you used to have then?
When I was little, I had a whole little unicorn collection, and I don't have many of them anymore. I have a few little Christmas ornaments left from when I was a kid that were unicorns. And
why unicorns?
Because they were fantasy. It was all kind of part of that fantasy. I liked fantasy books. They were a fantasy animal. They were, that was, and little girls like unicorns. Kittens and unicorns, and lots of little girls do, even if you didn't. You liked kittens.
Maybe not unicorns.
Not unicorns, but you liked kittens.
Allison's the one that likes kittens and rainbows. And
Yeah, it's normal for little girls.
What is a life hack that you would like to share with people?
God, I don't even know.
It can be anything, small, big, anything. Advice.
I don't know. I don't tend to run around acting like I have all the answers. I don't pretend to have the answers for people.
You've never given anybody any tips on how to make something?
No, I can't think of anything right now. When you have too many lemons, squeeze them and freeze them in an ice cube tray. And you can use them later. There you go. There's a life hack for you.
What is the difference from your childhood to childhoods today that you find weird or amusing? Differences from like your childhood to say my childhood. That's different.
That's a hard one because aside from the huge changes that have taken place in like the activities that kids like to do and stuff, you know, we had video games when I was a kid, but it was not anywhere near like what it is now. But I had such a different childhood from the kids around here. I mean, I lived in a city with like people all around, and kids would go outside and see who else was outside and start playing something because there were kids like right there outside. Whereas now, you know, a lot of kids, they walk outside and they're lucky if they can spot another human being because of where we live.
Well, how would you compare like a city kid from when you were a kid to a city kid now?
I don't really know. I'm not around city kids now. You know, I mean, I think that the interconnectedness of everything with phones and being able to connect to other players on video games and stuff has made kids spend more time doing those activities because there is an element of interacting with other people. When I was a kid and you were playing a video game, you were either playing by yourself or you were interacting with the kid sitting next to you. There wasn't this element of...
So you'd say technology is a big...
Technology's made a big difference in... I think there's this popular image that kids playing video games aren't interacting with other kids, but really they are. They're just not doing it in person. And that's something that I don't know that we always know how to define and to correlate how people interacted then to how people interact now. Because it's easy to say that it's not as personal because you're not in the same physical space, and yet what's to say that it isn't still personal? You know, we just don't know how to relate those to each other, and it's not necessarily that they're not relatable, just that we don't know how to relate them.
If you didn't have to sleep, what would you be doing in your extra time?
Reading. I'd be doing a lot more reading. I like to read. More of all the stuff that, I mean, there's, I like to do craft stuff, and there's a handful of things that I'd like to learn how to do that I've never gotten around to learning to do.
Like what?
Some of the older needlework things like nail binding and certain making lace, but you know, they're time consuming to learn, let alone to do. And so mostly I just plow ahead doing that I already know how to do. If I didn't have to sleep and I had those like extra 5 hours a day, then I might have more time to learn how to do some of these other things that I've never had the time to learn how to do.
Have you always liked making things?
Yeah. I learned how to crochet when I was 7. So like, and I liked to make things before that, but as far as like an actual usable skill, I've known how to do that since I was 7. You know, I have always made things. I don't think I made much when I was at college because I was so busy and because I lived in the dorm and I didn't have room for a lot of supplies and stuff like that. But even in college, I had my paints, you know, and I did a little bit of painting. But I've always liked to make things and, you know, makes me feel very accomplished when I get something done.
What hobby would you get into if money wasn't an issue?
Like a new hobby?
Yeah, like something besides making something or reading. Like just creating a completely new, something you've never tried before.
Well, if money were no object, I'd travel more. But I don't know if that really counts as a hobby. I mean, for some people it is, but, you know, I don't know if that.
It is. Some people spend a lot of time just traveling the world and learning new
Yeah.
things.
I mean, I would love, I mean, like we were talking before, there's a lot of places left in the world that I'd like to see.
What fictional place do you wish you could visit the most? Maybe out of some of those fictional books that you said you like to read?
Mm.
Since you said you like a lot of fiction books and
Yeah.
science fiction books.
This isn't a particular exact place, but it's more of an idea of a place. I've read a lot of stories that take place in space, on other planets, in space stations, or whatnot, where you're meeting new people, whole new,
What are some examples? The only thing that comes to my mind is Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy.
Well, I mean, even just think about like old episodes of Star Trek and stuff where they get to, they visit all these other planets or these other groups of people, or in Star Wars, when they're on different ships and stations and planets,
So do you wish you were traveling on the station, or do you wish you were living on the planet?
Mostly it would just be seeing new and continuing to travel, not just go to one place. I mean, like in when they made the first 3 movies from Star Wars, and they were on Naboo, and there were those waterfalls, and like that would be incredible to go see.
What are some annoying habits that other people have?
Oh my God. Where to start? Well, the number one annoying habit that kids have is this whole sticking their fingers in their noses. That's really like high up on my list, because then they start touching everything else and I get all, kids are gross. But annoying habits that like grown-ups have. I don't want to see what's in your mouth when you're chewing. I like the noises people make when they eat, drive me crazy. And I really, here's a big one for annoying things with, there are way too many grown-ups running around with their butt cracks hanging out because they're wearing low-rise jeans. I want everybody to go back to wearing jeans up above their butt cracks, because I don't want to see it. I don't know if that counts as a habit, but there you go.
What is something you like to do the quote-unquote old-fashioned way?
I like cooking and baking from scratch when I've got the time to do it, and to, like, I see all kinds of stuff like making cookies with a boxed cake mix, and I'm like, why? Why not just, find a good old recipe and do it that way? Or no bake cheesecake. Why would you bother? Make the real thing, that's something that if I'm gonna do it, and I don't do it often, but if I'm gonna do it, I do it right. Well, in my mind, it's right.
What is something that you would rate 10 out of 10 perfect?
What do you mean something? Like,
Anything. A concept, an item, a person, a place. If you could give anything a 10 out of 10 rating, what would it be?
I would rate Scrabble a 10 out of 10 game. I would rate pizza a 10 out of 10 food. I don't know. M&Ms are a pretty 10 out of 10 candy. Can't go wrong with M&Ms.
Don't you like collecting the containers?
Oh, don't get the containers are those are for the little mini M&Ms. Those little containers are useful, but
That's a collection you have. You have
there
the
you go.
box
I
collection.
do have a box collection. I forgot about my box collection. I have this collection of these plastic boxes from the 70s that have like little trays inside for putting your craft stuff, and then there's a different size box that's for spools of thread, and there's a different size box that's for sewing patterns, but they all kind of have this same style to them, and I have, about a dozen of them that probably more than a dozen, that I've collected so far. That I forgot about that. I do have that as a collection, but that's a very specific, but then there's the cigar boxes. I forgot about the boxes. There's boxes. I like boxes. Putting things in the boxes and organizing things in the boxes, and I don't know.
Have you always liked boxes?
Yes, I've kind of always liked boxes. I have this, my mother saved from when I was like 4 years old. We, at daycare or preschool or whatever, we made this little book that was all about us, and it had like a finger painted picture, and we traced our hand and our foot, and the teacher asked us questions like, what's your favorite food, what's your favorite color, and stuff like that. And then in the last few pages, they turned us loose on a whole stack of magazines and catalogs and stuff, and we were supposed to cut out pictures of all the things we liked, whatever it was, things we liked. And I filled like 4 pages with pictures out of a Tupperware catalog, which Abby thinks is hysterical because I now still like boxes and containers, and so, but I've apparently always liked boxes and containers for like decades now.
Are there any questions that you wish you had an answer for that you've never been able to get an answer for?
I wish I had a final answer about the God question. Then I wouldn't have to keep arguing with my kids about going to church. I wish I could definitively, here's the, put that question to rest so that we knew. And if it turned out I was wrong, then okay, at least I would know. And if it turned out I was right, then my kids would shut up. And they would finally know that I was right about something. So that would be that, if I could, right there, that would be the one question I would want to know the answer to.
There are 2 types of people in the world. What are these 2 types of people for you? Or even a couple examples if you want to talk.
I don't know. Tolerant people and intolerant people. It's kind of lofty. Dog people and cat people. I don't know. I mean, there's people that are open and welcoming and willing to try new and think about new and embrace other new and creative and interesting. And then there's closed people who think they have it all figured out and that nothing needs to be any different from what it is, and it needs to be just like them, and if it's different from them, then that's a problem. And so you've got open people and closed people.
What is one of your favorite smells?
I don't have favorite smells mostly. I think there's too many smells. I hate perfume. I hate scented candles. I hate air fresheners. I hate all of that stinky, smelly stuff. I don't understand why people spray flammable alcohol scented products on themselves and think that's a good idea. I find it annoying that unscented lotions still smell like stuff. I like the smell of baking, like while it's baking, but I don't want to smell a candle that smells like baking. Partly because it usually smells kind of artificial, and partly because it's just a bit of a tease. There's no actual baking. Or, you know, I don't mind smelling the real thing, but I don't want to smell the artificial of the thing. So, you know, I'm not a smells person.
What is something that you find to be very logical, but that not a lot of people see the logic, and therefore you are trying to figure out why they don't see the logic?
I don't know, most anything I argue with you about seems so obvious to me that you should just do it my way because it's probably, you know, the better way to do it anyway. But no, real answer. I don't know, Abby. I don't know. I can't. Not a real answer. Not. I mean, a snarky answer I can come up with, but I don't know about a real, actual answer.
What is an animal that you find interesting? Like particularly interesting in
I
a way?
like elephants. I like. They're smarter than most people think they are. They are more emotional than most people think they are. They're the way they use their trunk as, you know, another, like basically like an arm is pretty cool.
Have you
But if
seen-
it were a question of like what thing do I wish people could like have or do that was more like animals, I wish people could purr like cats. I think purring is like the coolest thing ever, and I wish people purred like cats. I think that'd be nifty.
Have you seen where they have elephants draw pictures?
Yes, there's a few elephants out there that actually seem to be drawing what they are looking at, which is pretty cool. Of course, there's also supposedly some cats that are painting. I think that one might be a little more of a stretch, but I'm not sure, so I don't know.
What is something you've really liked now that you're in rural Ohio? Something unexpected that you didn't think you'd like about being in the country, but that you actually do enjoy?
I alternate between feeling like everybody knows everybody and that's a bad thing, and feeling like everybody knows everybody and that's a good thing. I like that I feel safe, and that, you know, when I was a kid and we lived in New York, we literally had iron bars on the windows of our house. You know, one of my childhood memories is coming home and letting myself in, because, you know, single parent and all. And every day I would call my mother at work to tell her I was home. And I can remember one day calling her and telling her our house has been broken into, because everything had been thrown all over the place and ransacked and pulled out of the drawers and stuff. I don't worry about that happening. I don't have any real fears that my kids are going to come home and find that our house has been ransacked. And I like that safety that I feel out here versus when I've lived in more urban environments.
Do you have any particularly interesting stories from your childhood? Positive memories?
I remember, you know, we went on a school trip to see an opera at the Met. We didn't appreciate it then, but I look back on it now and I'm like, yeah, that was actually pretty cool. You know, my house, you could stand on the porch of my house and see the Manhattan skyline and the Statue of Liberty and stuff. And I didn't really appreciate it then, but I look back on it now. I'm like, yeah, that was actually pretty cool. I kind of miss the variety of people that I knew then. You know, the people that I knew that were from, their families were from all over the world, you know, and that they, you know, when we would have like, where we did a thing at school where we were each supposed to make a snack or a food that was like a family recipe. And there was a lot of variety that got brought in for that, you know, because there were kids that were, there were kids that were Chinese, and there was a kid from Israel, and you know, there were Jewish kids, and you know, so it was kind of really cool having this variety and this, you know.
So you liked having the diversity?
Yeah, there you go, diversity. I couldn't think of the word. Yeah, it seemed normal then because that's just all I knew at the time. It wasn't until later, like when I moved to Tennessee, that I started to kind of realize what a cool thing I'd once had that I'd lost. You know, because Tennessee did not at all have that kind of diversity. And we don't have it here, really. And I miss that, and, you know.
What's one stereotype that you find particularly annoying?
About what do you mean?
Anything. Because I know that you generally don't like stereotypes, so what's one that's like particularly like pointless?
Well, the whole man is a protector, woman is to be protected is pretty annoying. I mean, this idea that women need to be looked out for and protected, particularly by men, is just absolutely chafing. And because it's just so blatantly ridiculous that, you know, anybody can look after themselves, that, you know.
What is your favorite color?
Blue. I like blue, and I like things that are close to blue on the color wheel. So I like green, and I like purple, but I don't really like red or yellow. Once you get up to red and yellow, then I get, you know, I like that cooler side of the color wheel, but I really like blue a lot.
What's your favorite type of house? Like brick house or wood house or triangle house? Like what's a style of house that you really like?
I don't know. I never really thought about it. I don't really, I know what I don't really like. I don't really like, we've had them before. I didn't like when we lived in a one-story house because I didn't like how the bedrooms were like right there off the living room. I like better or when a two-story house, you know, and you kind of have your private living area that's separate from your kind of public living area. So, but you know, I like those old Victorian houses that you see, and with the tall, skinny windows and the, you know, I don't know.
If you could go to a state west of the Mediterranean, or not Mediterranean, Mississippi River, if you could go to a state west of the Mississippi River, where would you go?
Well, I've been west of the Mississippi, but I would, right now, I'd say Colorado because I'd go visit my cousin. I have a cousin that we're only 3 months apart in age, and our mothers are only siblings with each other. So we've always been very close. And in fact, for a portion of my middle school part of childhood, we all lived in one big house all together. Both of our moms and the two of us and his brother, who's like 5 years older than us. But so he's now gone back to living in Colorado with his family, his wife and kids. And so if I could travel that way, I would head for Colorado and go visit him and his family. Speaking of which, Aunt Gail is going to Colorado for Christmas. So, all
Are
right.
there any other stories that you want to tell?
No. I don't know. Did I ever tell you about Mom and Gail and I going to Disney when I was like 19 or 20?
No.
They'd gotten this idea, and Grandma Winnie and Aunt Gail and Grandma Susan and Grandpa Manley and I all went to Florida, to the beach, and stayed somewhere that Grandma had stayed before, Grandma Winnie had stayed before. And it was this like little apartment kind of setup. And so I had gone down too. I was able to, it was in the summer and I wasn't in classes, and I was able to get away from work. And I drove down to Tennessee, and then from there drove to Florida with them. And we stayed. And one of the first days that we were there, I got distracted reading on the beach, and I got very sunburned. Because I'd kind of not realized just how long I'd been out there. Anyway, so the next day, Grandma Susan and Aunt Gail and I had decided that we wanted to go to Disney World. And Grandma Winnie didn't want to go. She always thought that animated stuff was kid stuff and that it was stupid for grown-ups to go. And Grandpa Manley wasn't really into it, so so it's just going to be the three of us, except I had been burned to a crisp, and I was so burned that just being outside in the sun hurt. So we went to Disney World, and I wore pants and a shirt with sleeves to the elbow just so that I could stay, because of course you had to wait for rides and stuff, and you were out walking and all that kind of stuff. And even when we stood and waited somewhere, I would turn so that my feet were in the shadow, in my own shadow, because it hurt so much. And every so often we'd have to go in the bathroom, and I'd spray that solar cane stuff to try to get the sunburn to ease back a little bit. And I would go into the bathroom and be spraying all under my clothes and stuff like that. But it was still a really fun time, and I really had a great trip. That's that picture with the big sombrero.
Yeah.
That was that, But it was kind of it was a weird thing because it was painful, but I still really enjoyed it. So that was the last time I've been to Disney World. I haven't been in a long time. But of course, my dad growing up in Florida, I've been several times, but mostly as a kid. That was the last time I went, because we've never taken you guys.
We should.
I know, but your dad thinks it's ridiculous. And he's very resistant to the whole idea on the general principle of it.
Why?
Because he thinks it's ridiculous that they charge so much, and he's like, I'm not going to give them my money, that blah, 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 that's ridiculous and overpriced, and why should we, blah, 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 we can go do other things like camping, which is nothing like, I don't know, it's just one of those things I've argued with him a bunch.
Maybe
still
we'll
haven't
go in
made
the
it.
future.
Maybe.
Well,
Maybe.
I appreciate that you were willing to do this interview with me. Thank you.
Okay,
Hope you have a good day.
thanks. Going to Chipotle. All right, turn it off.